Kat, and this video is part 2 in my series all about my tumor. I had a Pheochromocytoma that was diagnosed and removed in 2011. In the first video in this series, I talk all about my symptoms and how long I had them and what my life was like leading up to diagnosis. In this video, I'm going to be talking about how I got diagnosed and what my treatment was like. So, at this point, all of my symptoms had escalated so quickly. I was having terrible palpitations, the pounding headaches were out of control, I was having these intense hot flashes, I was falling asleep all the time, I was having to pull over my car and sleep on the side of the road for like hours at a time. It was really bad, and it had gotten really bad really fast. I was losing chunks of hair, and I was really sick. I had a really rough week where I had a lot of hot flashes, I had a lot of really intense mood swings. I was just feeling absolutely awful. One day, I burst a bunch of blood vessels in my eye. I actually took a picture of this, and it was kind of out of nowhere, and it took a really long time to heal, which was really frustrating. I woke up one day, and it was like the combination of drugs for my anxiety and depression had just stopped working overnight. It was insane. I was so depressed. I had never been so depressed in my entire life. I literally just wanted to lay down and die. But I had already, committed to going to the state convention thing. I grew up in a Masonic youth organization, and we have our annual convention once a year in Fresno. And, I was planning to go. I had all these really good friends who were going to be there. A friend of ours had passed away, and we were planning on doing a blood drive in her honor at the convention. And so, I was really committed to going, and I just felt terrible. I had never been so sick in my entire life, and I knew that something was really wrong, but I had to go. I went to this convention, and I went to donate blood, and it was in one of those bloodmobile things, and my blood pressure was 200 over 115, which is really high. It's dangerously high. It's so high that the nurse who took my blood pressure told me, "Here's the address of the nearest hospital. I think you should go because your blood pressure is dangerously high." And I told her, "Oh no, I'm always used to feeling like crap. I always feel this way. I feel terrible. I can actually will my blood pressure to go down. Just watch." So I actually did. I made my blood pressure go back down, and she's not a very good nurse because then she was like, "Okay, well, I guess you can donate blood now." That's bizarre, okay? So I donated blood, and the rest of that weekend I just felt like shit. I would be, visiting my friends in their hotel rooms, and I would just be asleep in the corner. It was terrible. I would also kind of have these manic episodes where I had a ton of energy, and then I would just crash. And I had experienced that a little bit in my early 20s, but then once I was steadily on the set of medications that I stuck with for several years, I stopped having these bursts of energy with the extreme crashes. So it was interesting to me that they had come back around that time, but I was so sick and I was in such a head fog that it didn't really occur to me that something really drastic could be happening. So this was beginning of 2011. The Affordable Care Act became effective January 1st, 2011. Thank you. Obamacare and the Affordable Care Act are the same thing for those of you who still don't know at this point because you're out there and I don't know why. But the Affordable Care Act made it possible for me to go back on my parents' health insurance. My parents had fantastic health insurance. They had a PPO plan, which is amazing. Even though it was effective January 1st, I had to wait until, I think, May, the end of May, before all of the information was in the system. I was able to be on their insurance. I got my insurance card, and I could resume my health care. This whole time, I had just been doing the acting thing. I had been very, very sick and just sucking it up and still working somehow. I don't know how, but I would not have been able to work my retail job, that's for damn sure. The acting sort of kept me somewhat sane and kept me going, and I was just working when I was physically able to. I got a new primary care physician. We were living in Vacaville at the time, and I felt like he was the first doctor who was really hearing me. He listened to everything I had to say. He read through my entire medical history, which was seriously a stack of paper this thick that he had faxed to him. He read through everything, and he really genuinely wanted to help. And I got the sense that he was genuinely sorry that I had been this sick for this long, and he wanted to make it better. So at this point, I had spent so much money on the 2 months of health insurance that I had through Cobra that I had like no savings, and I was making very little money, and I was really struggling. So I had enough money to go see him, and I had enough money for the copay to go see one specialist. So he referred me to an endocrinologist and a gastroenterologist because I had so much abdominal pain and it was like really affecting my life, and I had all these ulcers, and we really wanted to figure out what was happening there. So I had had a colonoscopy and an endoscopy, I think in mid-2010. So I thought, okay, well, I had been to a gastroenterologist fairly recently. I've never been to an endocrinologist. Let's go with that one. From 2006 to 2011, including this new primary care physician and this new endocrinologist, I saw 35 different practitioners trying to figure out what was wrong with me. And basically, the general consensus was that it was all in my head. That's what it would boil down to. I was being told that it was psychosomatic. It was part of my anxiety and depression. I needed to follow up with my psychiatrist. At this point, I was in therapy with my psychologist, who was also in communication with my psychiatrist, who was treating me with the psychotropic medications, and I was still dying. So I was able to see this new endocrinologist, and she was pretty cold. Honestly, she was kind of like all the other doctors I had seen before my new primary care physician, and I had my appointment to see her. If you watch my previous video, my appointment to see her was, I think, a week or a week and a half after I had gone to that convention and my blood pressure reading was 200 over 115. So in late 2010, I was seeing doctors probably 3 days a week, and they take your vitals every time you go to the doctor. They take your blood pressure, your pulse, all that. I had never had a high blood pressure reading in my entire life, except for when I went to donate blood. So it wasn't really something that was on my mind. It was like this one-time anomaly that I had had that high blood pressure. So I went to see this endocrinologist, and there's something that sort of happens with certain doctors where if they're really authoritative and they tell you that they think you're crazy, you just sort of listen to them. You're like, okay, yeah, I'll try harder. And you just let it go. It's because they're an authority figure and something just happens in your little lizard brain and you're like, okay, whatever you say. It's bad, it's gotta stop. I went to see her, and she had been faxed my healthcare history, which was a stack of paper this thick. So she told me when I first got into the room with her, I read your book on your medical history, and she was kind of a bitch about it. Like, she seemed bothered that I had such a complicated and long medical history, and I was apologizing to her for having to do her job, which was read about all the shit I'd been through already. She went over everything with me, and she went over my symptoms with me, and she definitely thought it was a little bit strange, and it was pretty significant that I had had all of these symptoms suddenly worsen, and then had the new symptoms of my hair falling out, and the pleva, and, you know, that kind of stuff. So I guess what she wanted to do was run a panel, and she wanted to look at my thyroid. My thyroid had felt totally normal to her, but because I had all these symptoms, she wanted to check it out. So she was wrapping up the appointment with me, and I had my lab orders in my hand to get that stuff done, and I was literally walking out of the room, and she just like stopped me. She said, "Is there anything else you can think of that we should look at?" And I said, "Oh, you know what? For the first time ever, my blood pressure was really high." And she said, "How high?" And I said, "It was like 200 over 115. And it was just like watching a light bulb go off in her head. And I think in that moment, she knew. And she's like, "Okay, we'll come back in, sit down." And she said, "I'm going to cancel this order that I have for these labs because you had these done, you know, a couple years ago and nothing came up with them. I'm going to test you for something else. And it's really rare. You probably don't have it. I've never had a patient who's had it, and I've been practicing for 30 years. So you probably don't have it, but I want to test you for it just to be sure, just to rule it out." So she gave me this lab order for a 24-hour urinalysis, which was looking for catecholamines and metanephrines. And these are byproducts of your adrenals or your chromaffin tissue. So your adrenals sit on top of your kidneys. You have one on each side, and They're kind of like these fatty looking little white things, and they produce adrenaline. So when you get really scared or really angry, you have that rush, like that rush of heat and energy. And like the Hulk, when he turns green, it's adrenaline. Weird, right? So it triggers what's called the fight or flight response. When you have adrenaline in your system, certain needs of your body shut down and other senses become heightened. And this is designed to get you out of danger. So if you were in the wild and you were fighting another animal, you would need to have this extra strength and this extra speed and this extra mental clarity. And that is what adrenaline gives you. When your body has too much adrenaline for too long, it can make you very, very sick. So that is what led to like all these other symptoms that I had. And when you have too much adrenaline in your system consistently, it also raises your blood pressure. So your blood pressure can get so high that you're at risk for a heart attack, you're at risk for stroke. It has all these other issues. So she didn't really go into a lot of depth about what it was. She told me it's an adrenal tumor, and so that could be contributing to your mood swings, your hot flashes, all of these things. And she reiterated like 5 or 6 times, it's very rare, I don't think you have it, I'm just gonna test you for it to rule it out. Which was kind of frustrating because I was spending so much money to see a specialist, and she was basically saying like, I don't think you have this, I'm gonna do one test and then make you come back to look for other stuff. So I was kind of like annoyed about that actually. But I left from her office and I immediately went straight to the lab and I picked up the container. The container was an orange jug that I had to collect my pee in for 24 hours. And then the next day I had to take it back to the lab and they would analyze it. I think it was about 2 days later, I got a phone call from my endocrinologist and she said, Katrina, it's Dr. Murray. I need you to call me back right away. It's very important. Which is kind of scary. Because even in the past when I've had abnormal test results, it's usually a nurse who would call me and then, you know, she'd say, there's some abnormal results. I'm going to have you talk to the doctor, and then she'd go get the doctor and the doctor would talk to me about whatever was going on. So it was kind of weird to like get a voicemail from a doctor who sounded scared. She actually sounded scared. My heart was like racing, and I called her back and she said, well, I got your test results for the urinalysis and your levels of these catecholamines and metanephrines are so far off the charts that I have absolutely no doubt that you have this tumor. Unfortunately, we don't always know exactly where they are. It's most likely on your adrenal gland, but now we have to do an MRI to see where it is and how big it is, and then from there we can move forward. And she told me that she was going to be going on vacation, which was like really shitty timing. And she apologized for this. She said, I know it's very frustrating, but when you get the test results back from your MRI, if I'm not here, you can call your primary care physician and go from there. And she told me, she's like, I know this can be very upsetting. I want you to get in bed and don't do anything that is emotionally upsetting or makes you sweat. I need you to be on bed rest until we get the results from your MRI. Unfortunately, I couldn't get an appointment for an MRI for I think like another week and a half. So I was stuck on bed rest, and you know, at this point, like, she had told me she was pretty certain that I had had this tumor, so then I started like Googling this tumor, and it's very upsetting. I did want to wait until I had the results of the MRI before I freaked myself out too much. So I tried to go about my life as normally as I could while still trying to be on bed rest and being a compliant patient. I was at home all the time. I wasn't necessarily in bed the entire time. So, you know, I was just like biding my time, trying not to panic, waiting for the MRI. My husband was my boyfriend at the time. I didn't tell him too much about the tumor or exactly what it meant when I first found out that I pretty much had it and we just needed to find it. I told him that the doctor thought I might have this and that we have to have an MRI. So I didn't want him to panic. I told my family what was going on, but I didn't tell them that it was like pretty much a sure thing. So after a week or a week and a half, I was finally able to have my MRI, and I went in. And, you know, like, I had had a lot of imaging done before because I had been so sick for so long. So, like, I knew the whole drill. It was just second nature to me. I went and I was, like, joking with the radiologist tech, and, you know, like, you have your friendly banter and you joke about, like, how many times you've done this and that kind of crap. They injected me with the contrast to be able to see if there was anything in there, and then we did the MRI. And when I got out of the machine, they stopped making eye contact with me. They stopped joking with me. I asked them, did you see anything weird in there? And they were like, oh, well, you know, the radiologist has to read the results and then they'll be sent to your doctor. And it was just like very clinical and like cut and dry after that point. And here's the tip. Anytime you have any kind of imaging done, you can request a copy of the disc and you can take it home and put it in your computer and look at it. So I requested a copy because, you know, my endocrinologist was on vacation. I didn't really know how long it was going to take for her to see the results. I didn't know if my primary was going to have to step in and see it. So I took the disc home, I put it in my computer, and there was this thing right in the middle, bright white, and it looked like an eye staring back at me. And I knew, like, that's not supposed to be there. That's totally not normal. And I knew that was it. And then I started to get pretty scared. It was where they said it probably was, and I was trying really hard not to panic. So for some reason, I think a couple days later, I think like the next day, I had to go to Gilroy to my parents' house. Not really sure why. I was there with my mom, and I called my primary care physician, and I told him, you know, my endocrinologist said she was going to be on vacation and that I should have you see if the radiologist has read my results yet. So my doctor's nurse said that she was going to call me back. They were going to contact the radiologist and see if they could find out anything. Then about an hour and a half later, my primary care physician called me back personally, and he said, well, we got the radiologist's results back. It looks like you have a pheochromocytoma on your right adrenal gland. Obviously, your endocrinologist has been testing you for this. Did she explain what it was? And all these things. And I said, yeah, she told me what it was. And he said, okay, so what do you want to do? I said, take it out. Duh. He's like, good. I was hoping you were going to say that because that's kind of your only option, looking at the size and location of this tumor. And he said, where do you want to go? And I said, Stanford. It was just like the first thing that popped into my mind. Stanford it's like 40 minutes from where I grew up, so my parents were there and I knew it would be convenient, and I just felt good about Stanford. So he's like, okay, I'll call you right back. And I think probably like 10 minutes later, he called me back and he said, Stanford is very excited to have you. I will give them your information and send the referral in, and then they'll be contacting you to set up your pre-op appointment. I said, okay, that's great. And he told me, you know, and it's actually really good that you wanted to go to Stanford because other than the Mayo Clinic, they are apparently your only option. But this is a good thing because they've done the surgery before, they have experience with it, and you're in really good hands. And that moment was terrifying. It was terrifying because at this point, you know, I had read up on the pheochromocytoma. I had found out the statistics involved, and I knew what a dangerous tumor it was and what a dangerous procedure it was. And I think the odds are a lot better now because they have a lot more practice doing it. But back then, my odds of surviving the surgery were not great. They were not good at all. And you know, like I had all these hormones in my system and they were really screwing with my head, and I felt scared for my family because if I didn't survive, like I didn't know if they would be okay. So I had all these like thoughts racing through my head and all of these hormones in my system, and it was a really, really intense moment. Like, I felt bad for my boyfriend, too, but, God, like, how twisted is my sense of self-worth that I was like, if I die, he'll be fine. He'll actually probably be better off and find someone amazing. But, I mean, your family, like, so more than anything, like, the fear that I was feeling was for them. And, I decided to not really tell them how severe this was and what the odds were. And I just, like, I didn't want them to worry. So I hung up and I went to the other room and I told my mom that they had found it and it was where they thought it was and I have to have surgery and that I was kind of scared. And she was super positive. And so on one hand, like, I had this fear for them, but on the other hand, I felt overwhelmingly relieved because I had been so sick for so long and I had recently just gotten cripplingly ill, and I thought I was just gonna get sicker for the rest of my life until I died. And I really didn't want that life. So it was terrifying finding out what it was and that it was a sure thing, and, you know, knowing for sure that I'm gonna go in for the surgery that's really risky, but God, I wasn't crazy. It wasn't all in my head. We had found it, and I had this opportunity where if everything went well, I would have a new life. And that was like such an amazing gift to me, that I would have this surgery and I wouldn't have to be on all these medications after, and I'd have more energy, and like maybe for the first time in years I might actually know what it's like to feel normal and to feel healthy, and that was amazing. So emotionally, it was pretty intense. So I think I'm gonna stop this video here because that's sort of the end of the diagnostic process, and in my next video I'm going to talk about the treatment process and recovery and what that was like. So thank you for watching this entire video up to this point. If you haven't watched the first part, go back and watch that video first, and then make sure you check out the next video in this series, and thanks for watching.